In 2019, the Indian government launched the National Clean Air Program, promising to slash particulate pollution by up to 40% by the year 2026. But looking at this map of air quality from January 2026 shows a very different reality. The dense cluster of red and dark red dots across the northern half of the country indicates active poor and very poor air quality conditions. Globally, the scale of this problem is staggering. Today, 83 out of the world's 100 most polluted cities are located entirely within India. We can see exactly how bad it gets by looking at this bar chart of the worst offenders. Ghaziabad, Delhi recorded average PM 2.5 concentrations of 184 and 169 micrograms per cubic meter, towering high above both the national standards and World Health Organization guidelines. The 2026 deadline has arrived. So why did this flagship policy fall short, and what is keeping the skies toxic? The cost of this failure is measured in human lives. Every year, 2 million Indians die prematurely from exposure to polluted air. This constant inhalation takes a severe biological toll. On average, non-smoking Indians have a 30% lung function deficit compared to European populations, as microscopic particulate matter infiltrates deeply into the respiratory system. Ultimately, this environment steals time. For the average Indian citizen, breathing the ambient air reduces their life expectancy by 5.3 years. These biological costs are visible across the healthcare system, where masked workers monitor patients who can no longer pull enough oxygen without mechanical help. Missing a policy deadline is an administrative failure, but the reality on the ground is an ongoing mass casualty public health emergency hidden in plain sight. To understand the scope of the policy's failure, we have to look at the January 2026 audit by the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, which tracked data from 248 monitored cities. This donut chart isolates the international standing. The solid blue ring confirms that not a single city out of the 97 National Clean Air Program cities met the World Health Organization's safe guideline of 15 micrograms per cubic meter. Even when measured against India's own, much more lenient national standards, the compliance collapses. Looking at the upper charts, those massive red segments show that 123 cities actively breached the domestic safety threshold. A handful of locations recorded marginal shifts, nudging their daily averages from severe down to poor. But the baseline reality for hundreds of millions of people remains actively dangerous. To figure out why the policy missed its mark so widely, we have to trace the exact sources pumping poison into the atmosphere. This chart breaks down the baseline drivers of smog. Industry dominates at 51%, followed by vehicular emissions at 27%. Then seasons change. In autumn and spring, crop residue burning adds a massive 17% spike to the load. On the ground, this looks like vast stretches of agricultural fields intentionally set on fire. It's a cheaper alternative to mechanical tilling, but it sends thick, rolling smoke directly toward heavily populated areas. Meanwhile, the massive industrial slice of the pie is fueled almost entirely by one source. Despite a push for clean energy, India still relies on thermal coal for nearly 79% of its domestic energy supply. Data from the World Bank reveals that this smog is now thick enough to physically block the sun, directly disrupting the nation's solar power grids. This sunblock effect slashes India's annual solar power production by up to 28 terawatt-hours. In dollars, that translates to an economic loss of up to $845 million every single year. This creates a cycle where fossil fuel pollution actively siphons away the revenue and energy required to fund the transition to cleaner sources. Escaping this cycle requires moving past localized efforts and fixing the structural flaws in how India manages its environment. Right now, the national program lacks teeth. There is no hard penalization mechanism for authorities, industries, or sectors that miss their mandated reduction targets. Furthermore, smog doesn't stop at a city limit sign. True progress requires airshed-based management, where strict political borders dissolve into regional zones defined by shared atmospheric and weather patterns. We also have a massive blind spot regarding where the pollution is actually coming from. Rural monitoring is sparse, meaning millions of low-income households forced to burn raw biomass and wood for indoor cooking remain an untracked, highly concentrated source of toxic exposure. Until policies include enforceable penalties and treat the atmosphere as interconnected regions, any future targets will remain empty words on paper. As we enter what energy experts are calling a decisive decade, rapidly phasing down the reliance on coal is no longer optional. It is mandatory. For the people living through this, the scale of the challenge is claustrophobic. Iconic landmarks disappear behind a suffocating brown haze that residents have to physically push through just to commute. There is a sharp disconnect between the bureaucratic timelines debated in closed government rooms and the physical, burning reality of taking a breath on these streets. Breathing clean air is a biological necessity. It cannot be treated as a luxury that a nation eventually earns after it finishes industrializing. The time for paper promises expired in 2026. India's economic future and the survival of its citizens depends entirely on clearing the actual air.